The advice provided in this podcast is general in nature. For your specific situation, you will need to get in contact with your local OT, vehicle modifier or mobility dealer and set yourself up with an assessment or a trial. Trials really do put you in the driver's seat, so get out there and get one going. Before we get started, we just want to do a quick shout out to our sponsors who make this show possible: Mobility Engineering, Driving Well and Williams OT. This show takes time and money to put together, and we are forever grateful for their passion for our industry. Okay, enough of the business. Let's get on to the interview with Jenny and Brad.
Welcome everybody to the DriveAble Podcast. I'm Jenny Gribbin from Driving Well Occupational Therapy in Brisbane, and here is Brad Williams from Williams OT in Adelaide. How are you, Brad?
Very well, but I've got some internet issues, so I'll try to be as clear as I possibly can. But I'm well, Jenny.
We'll see how we go. So, Brad, today we are talking with a specialised driving instructor, Liz Beggs. She's from my driving school in Moreton Bay region in northern Brisbane, and she's been working as a specialised driving instructor in the disability space for the last 5 or so years, and I work with her quite often. And I know you've had a couple other episodes in the DriveAble podcast about talking with specialised instructors. So I think it was Mark Fraser back in episode 74 that you were talking with him about learning to drive with vehicle modifications.
Yeah, it was a great chat, and I encourage people to go back and listen to that episode where we really unpacked what's involved in a specialised driving instructor approach for learning different controls, not your standard steering wheel and standard pedals, but the real from a spinner knob to hand controls to left foot accelerators to the really high-end modifications as well, because Mark's one of the driving instructors for the Total Ability vans that travel around Australia. He's our South Australian one here in where I'm coming to you from, and he was talking about what's actually involved in that approach. But today we're going to talk about specialized driving instruction with Liz for the not modifications, the specialized approach for people that need specialized instruction for how to manage a typical car.
That's right. So she does a lot of work with the modifications, but as well. But today we're focusing more on the autistic learner drivers, anxiety, ADHD, those kinds of diagnoses where we've neurodivergent conditions that we might see more challenges with learning to drive. And we've talked about that many times in many different episodes. But I'm really keen to get Liz on and get her perspective. So, Brad, are you ready for another great episode?
I am indeed. This is a real hot topic at the moment with the NDIS, throwing a curveball to say that this may not be funded moving forward in the NDIS. So, really hot topic right now, and you'll understand through this conversation why it's so important.
Let's do it.
Mobility Engineering is Australia's leading automotive product supplier for disability customers. We have installers all across the country, over 100 of them, and we have the largest range of mobility products for vehicles in the country. Get in touch with Mobility Engineering for any of your driving solutions.
Welcome back to the DriveAble Podcast. Brad and I are here today with Liz Beggs, a specialised driving instructor in Brisbane. How are you today, Liz?
I'm good, thank you. And yourself?
Yes, I'm all right, thank you. I'm all right. And Brad, I think, is going well?
I'm all good, thank you. Hey, Liz, you're actually in your car? Are you in between lessons at the moment? Is that where we're catching you?
In your car at the moment, Liz, we can see.
I am. Yes.
Because we're catching you in your car, the internet might be a little bit up and down. So we'll see how this goes with the interview. But what we want you to do is tell us a little bit about your background and how you came to be a driving instructor.
Okay. My background is actually in biotechnology. So I studied university at biotechnology at university. But after I entered the industry, I got really bad depression. So I ended up having to leave the industry and basically learn how to function with genetic depression. And I had to find a job that allowed me to function with genetic depression and stop working when I needed to and pick up extra work when I could. And that's how I became a driving instructor. So
There would have been maybe lots of different opportunities for you. How did you land on driving?
I was working as in sales for a little while, and I was training some of the younger sales reps to learn how to drive between the different areas we were going to. And that's how I sort of went, oh, okay, well, let's give this a go.
Yeah, right.
Wow, I didn't know that, Liz. So I've been working with Liz for 5 years or so, Brad, and I actually didn't know Liz's entrance into the world of driving instruction and specialized driving instruction. So that's quite interesting. Whilst you were working in another field, you kind of realized, oh, this is actually something I'm actually quite good at doing, in terms of teaching younger people how to drive.
Yeah. Yeah.
So how did you move through that process? Like, did you do it through a training school? How did you actually get your formal qualifications?
As a driving instructor,
Yeah.
I started with I went and joined a company and got the certification through them. Okay, and I worked with them for a number of years before I went into the specialized field, and then I branched out on my own.
Mm.
So let's talk about that specialized field. When did you realize that you could work with people with disabilities? How did you discover that, and how long ago was that?
I discovered that, well, before 5 years ago, because that's how long I've been working with Jenny. I started, as I said, it just as a normal driving instructor, and I was getting a lot of clients come to me who had anxiety, like high anxiety, and ASD, because I had an understanding. I just got recommended, like, I'd have one person, they'd recommend a friend come to me. And so it wasn't like high in disabilities, okay, but at the lower end of that ASD spectrum. And then from there, because I discovered that I was actually getting referrals for these clients, I contacted the OTs about getting additional training and being able to help them. So
Good on you. Good on you. Well done. I mean, in my world, that doesn't happen very often, that someone has the initiative. They kind of fall into it a little bit, and then discover that this is actually, not a bad thing. And then with working with the OT, we tend to suggest that they get a little bit of training here or there, or they're reluctant to do it. So good on you for pushing it and going to seek more referrals, more work, more experience with working with people with disabilities. What kind of process did you? I don't know you, so I'm going on a discovery journey here. Jenny probably knows you a little bit more, so I'm gonna pester you with lots of questions. How did you? What training did you go through to really develop your skills for the people with disabilities, autism, and those type of areas?
well, I'm quite lucky in the background that I have, because I had the biotechnology background, I had the science background. I didn't understand already about the disabilities. And of course, the depression gave me more of a personal understanding of the struggles they face. I started with working with Chad, and he sent me a whole heap of information around ASD and and the way they learn in the cars and the way they operate in the cars. And then I got recommended to do Jenny's course, available for driving instructors and OTs, and I did that. So I've done that twice now. So that's how I really did start, but I also work very closely with the OTs, in the fact that if I have a client who is struggling, I will go back to them and I would ask for advice, okay, in how to break up the information, so we could help them the best, whether that be off-road or on-road.
Yeah.
So it's been
off-road, we're talking about in the office type of scenario or at the side of the road. You're talking about that type of scenario?
Both.
Yeah, right.
Both. So sometimes it's off-road in the fact that I'll pull over and we'll hop out and we'll go through the scenario, okay, or I'll hop out and we walk through it, or it's sometimes in the office with the OTs working on like a capacity building type activities.
The language you're using, Liz, I love it. It's talking to me, but I'm a driver trained OT. So just to unpack some of the jargon, ASD for the people that might be tuning in for the first time or listening from a different world. We're talking about autism, and we're talking about autistic drivers and some of the challenges that they might have learning to drive compared to your neurotypical 16-year-old who's going to get their L's and move through the learning process with about, I don't know what it's like in Queensland, but the industry average in South Australia is about 10 to 15 hours of driving instructor lessons, thereabouts, and then the rest is with family or friends or qualified supervising drivers. In South Australia, we only have to get 75 hours in our logbook, but I know other states are a little bit different. What challenges do you notice for people with autism that come to autism's a spectrum, by the way. It can be very varied, but what are some of the things that you've noticed when you've started to really work with kids with autism? What have you noticed are some of the challenges?
Some of the biggest challenges are taking what they've learnt on the screen and on paper, because we have in Queensland, we have the PrepL online. Okay, so they could get help to do the PrepL. Okay, but then they have trouble.
To have their test done, actually, in fact, to complete their test.
It's the same in every state. That's the same in South Australia too, by the way. We don't know if brothers or sisters are doing the L's course or mum or dad or support workers. So yeah, you're absolutely taking what they've done on their My L's online, it's called in South Australia, taking what they've learnt in a course and actually putting it into a practical course and even trying to remember it.
That's correct. Very, putting very it into reality. Like, even taking a simple intersection and you can learn the road rules and you can learn, okay, at the end of the street, we're turning left. Okay, which means we're giving way to cars coming from the right. But then putting that into reality, they can get very confused with which direction cars are coming in and what that looks like. So that's one of the biggest challenges, is taking what they've learned and understanding it, and breaking it down into its individual segments, and really developing the very basic fundamentals and understanding them. Because the fundamentals of then what, of course, like just even basic giveaways, changing lanes and merging, that then develops into our higher end skills. So if we don't get them right, we can't develop our proper higher end skills, which is learning to move around traffic and learning to read cars. And so because driving is, it has a language of its own. So, and that's the other thing that, of course, people with ASD do struggle with. It is learning that and learning those subtle cues.
Yeah.
Because each individual cue, you have to know how to read it, but then you have to know how to react to it.
And that's the thing that we see within the context of driving, is that they've got to be able to do all of that instantaneously right there in that moment. And I think that's where we often see can be a breakdown of skills, is that they might be able to do one component or the next component or the next component, but to put them all together right there and then within a time frame where I'm clicking my fingers to indicate that we need to do that right now, can often be quite challenging.
That's correct. So putting that sequence. So of course, someone with ASD, learning disabilities, or a combination of all of them, like, we'll teach them the cue. Okay. Then of course we have to then not only teach them that, but then go, okay, well, this is how you react to that cue. And then they have to learn to put those two together. And sometimes, of course, some people struggle with that and remembering that. So, and that's where it can become more challenging. So, because you may have to take a few different directions in order for them to fully understand it. So, and not only do it through observation, but also walk it through, drive it, experience it, do visual. So
I love where we're heading with this discussion, Liz. You're really talking about some of the real key strategies that in your toolkit, I guess, about what you're able to do and what you've learned from working alongside occupational therapists and doing additional training. I do want to just take a step back, because what you're talking about is the skills from a specialized driving instructor perspective. Yes. I want to just take a step back and explore that. Like, what are the differences between, a specialized instructor and to, like, how you've come to have additional skills and experience and training and things like that, to what did your, before you sort of stepped into that field, what were the differences with being a regular instructor, right?
Liz, do you teach both still? Do you teach? Oh, so you're now in the specialized world 100% of the time?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
I sometimes teach family members of the clients.
Brothers and sisters. Yeah. So that's what I wanted to ask. When the neurotypical, what Jenny was saying, what's the difference between a neurotypical and a not neurotypical client? Like, what do you notice as the big differences? What, you got a neurotypical kid that jumps in the car, brother or sister. What skills are you? What's the difference?
The difference is how you can break down the information. Okay, you don't often have to break down the information to such a big extent for a neurotypical. The biggest example I can think of, and that a lot of people can relate to, is an example of what straight is at a roundabout. Okay, so a neurotypical person goes straight. They automatically think straight, going round the roundabout and taking the second exit. Someone who is ASD, and I had a client currently, she thinks of straight, and she, of course, thinks going straight over the roundabout.
Okay. She really knows interpreting that literally. Yeah,
that's correct. She interprets it literally. She knows that's wrong. her brain is her common sense is telling her it's wrong, but each time I say that, that's exactly where her brain goes.
Mm.
Okay, and she's asked me to say, can you say something else?
Mm.
And I said to her, I can say a few different ways. I can say, okay, we're going straight at the roundabout. We're going to take the second exit.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that way, or the third exit. Okay, but I will always include the straight because she still needs to learn that terminology.
Mm.
Okay.
I'll help unpack that, because at the final stage, they have to do a driving assessment. Well, in South Australia, they have to do a driving assessment, and they have to get used to a different person giving them instructions.
That's correct.
And the instructions can be varied. So we're spending a lot of time, like you said, Liz, training the conversation, the new language that is in the car, and it's adapting to the different languages and the different terminology, like going straight, taking the second exit. It's the same thing, but for someone with autism, it's something that triggers different responses.
That's correct.
You just glitched a tiny bit there, Brad, but your voice caught up, so we'll keep going. So, Liz, what I am really keen to hear, like, sometimes what we experience as driving OTs is that we might get a client that, for example, they're an autistic learner, and they might have actually started their driving learn to drive journey and career, and they might have started with what in our industry we sort of call a regular instructor. So a driving instructor that sure has got experience in teaching learners how to drive a car, but they may not have engaged with occupational therapist or additional training and things like that. And they claim that they're experienced in working with autistic learners and learners with other conditions. But then they've kind of plateaued, or they've had a struggle, or they've had a really unfortunate experience with a particular instructor, and they come to us to have an assessment, and we look at their driving performance. We do the potential to drive assessment approach with most of these young people, and Brad and I have talked about that on several episodes of this podcast, and we've had Dr. Miriam Monaghan on as a guest as well earlier this year to talk about how she developed that approach. We see these clients that they may have done 20, 30, 50, 100 hours driving practice, and we see all of these challenges and problems that they're still having, as well as hear some horrific stories. What's your comments on that? What's your take on that?
I understand. I do struggle with that myself, in the fact that it causes a spectrum. People don't know when to go to the OTs and don't know when. There's no cutoff. Like a lot of the times definitely when I was doing normal work, a lot of the times I'd have ASD1 clients. So they're and they were fine. They're fine with me. They were fine with any of the driving instructors. But the clients that I work with now who are ASD2, their experiences and the things that they've come to us have sort of caused a physical or psychological damage from those experiences, because they've been pushed too far too soon, or the other driving instructor, the non-specialized, can't read the small cues of a client who is being overwhelmed.
Yeah.
For example, I had a client just yesterday, literally, who we were driving. It was he's relatively new, and he's only on about our third lesson. Okay, so I'm doing the pedals, he's just doing steering and indicating. And I asked him to turn left into a street, completely missed it. I said, okay, well, let's take the next left. And we overturned. And then I asked him, I said, are you struggling with concentration? You seem to be struggling. And he goes, what? So I pulled him over. Okay. So the first cue I had was he missed the street, which he hadn't done before. Okay. And that tells me, okay, why did he miss it? Then he overturned. Okay. Again, that's missing. That's a cue to tell me that he's struggling with the turn. He's struggling with what to do. So pulling him over, I discovered that his eyes were irritated. Okay, I pulled him over. I said, what's wrong? Are you having trouble with concentration? What happened just then? And his eyes were irritated because of the aircon. So we stopped for 5 minutes. He got out, had a break, popped back in. I turned the aircon off, and then we were able to continue the lesson. But if you went to a normalised driving instructor, they wouldn't have picked up on a lot of that. Most of the time, they would have just continued and pushed. And that could have caused more issues because then he would have got to a stage where he didn't want to drive.
Yeah.
Because of the irritations. So the feedback from the driving instructors and the continual challenges, it wouldn't have been positive environment. So yeah, good on you, Liz.
I think that's been a big key in what I've seen and what I've learned over the course of 5 years of working in this space is that figuring out the just right challenge has been really, really pivotal. And I think that's, a lot of the things that you're saying, like you're able to figure out what is the right level of challenge, like meeting the client where they're at with their ability and not pushing past them because they can get so overloaded. That's a really, really common feature. And figuring out, well, okay, they're here. This is where I need to meet them, and figuring out then, okay, well, what's the next step, and figuring out how to add that on without them getting overloaded.
That's correct.
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of driving instructors, typical driving instructors, would feel like they're not doing their job if they just did left-hand turns for 2 or 3 lessons in a row to build those foundational skills. That's because it's not typical of how people learn. They want to be exploring. They want to be doing parking on lesson 1 or left and right hand turns on lesson 1 or 2, or going out on a main road in lesson 1 or 2. If you do that with somebody with autism, we can have a serious meltdown and adverse effect. Would that be true, Liz?
Yeah. So I remember when I did my training for becoming a driving instructor, one of the big things that I remember them saying that going onto a main road is actually easier to learn to steer and stay in the lane than staying in the back streets. Which
all you're doing is following the red lights. Yeah.
Yeah, because all you do is steer straight, and you just have to slow down for a light and then go again, and then slow down for a light. And but it doesn't benefit someone. Some people it does, but from our perspective and what I do with specialized driver training, that would overwhelm someone, because sometimes you have to even teach them, and you have to go through the lane positioning, and you can't do that on a main road. So you have to teach them how to stay in their lane and where the car is positioned on the road. So the first thing you go is out onto a main road. That will become overwhelming very quickly because of how much stimulus is there.
Yeah, the movement of traffic as well, of how fast they're actually coming, and how many stimuli are coming all at once, can be very overwhelming, for sure, because on a back street, we can predict one car at a time, can't we, Liz? And you can say, well, that car is doing this and that car is going to do this action. We can read the body language of a car and teach how to read the body language of a car, whether an indicator's on or a wheel is turning or the wheel is slowing down in its revolutions. We can read what's happening with the car. And we know kids with autism quite often struggle to read those social cues off of a face. We have to really teach the social cues of how that car is actually operating on the road and what's it going to do next. So I had an experience yesterday in a car where an elderly gentleman was reversing out of his driveway. Now, I could see that he looked over his shoulder, but we were directly in the B pillar blind spot. He didn't get all the way around. He didn't look all the way around, and he just kept on rolling. And it was a great learning opportunity because we were teaching that because my autistic client was just not reacting to it at all. So I was on the brake and we had to teach that the revolutions of the wheels, watching that wheel move, is a cue to say, well, this isn't right. That should be stationary, that wheel. And what I've noticed, I don't know if you've noticed this, Liz, is that picking up movement of a car is very different against the background. Because the background's moving all the time, whether we're moving towards it, the background moves like behind a car, or whether the car's moving against the background. It's very hard for kids with autism to judge that. So watching wheels, these are the types of specialized, real individual specialized approaches that we have to problem solve all the time, Liz. Would you agree?
That's correct. Yes, that's correct. So,
what recommendations would you have for parents? What type of things could you tell parents about working with their kids? Because kids have to practice as well.
I do say wait until they're ready to go out with the parent. Don't push them too early. Wait until you talk to us, talk to their OTs, make sure they're ready to start driving with you, the parent, with themselves. Okay. If you push too early and you go too early, again, the parent can cause issues and then they won't want to go with them again.
Well, it falls into what we were just talking about. Most often
Yes.
parents want to drive to the shops and pick up a loaf of bread and then come back again. Oh, well, you drive, Junior. You drive. You can do that. You can drive us to the shops. It's no worries. It's just down the main road. And what happens is we get all of that stimulus and then
correct.
there's tension in the car because the parents are going, no, don't pull out into that gap. No, that gap's not appropriate. And then we cause a poor environment for learning, don't we?
That's correct. And coming back from that is very hard. Okay. Yeah. Just like with any other environments of where you're learning. Okay. If you go to a school, if you had a bad environment, you're not going to want to go there. Okay. Even if it's a different school a lot of the time. So they don't want to go back to that. Okay, so creating that environment to start with is very, very important because that also gives them that confidence to want to try the new things and that trust in you that you're going to keep them safe and you're going to take it at their pace. Parents also need to learn the language of how to instruct them. Okay, because I get a lot of parents, once they're ready to start with their parents, the ones who work with me are the ones who will succeed more readily. Like I hate the, how do I put it? The go command, where you get a parent at an intersection and they're like, go. That does not work. And that just causes more stress. So they need to learn the best way and work with us in order to help their child continue their progression rather than stalling.
And I love that you pointed out immediately, the first thing that you pointed out was wait until they are ready to be learning with parents, because all of the things that you said around, creating adverse, having an adverse event and having parents, get panicked, and a panicked parent who is not a driving instructor, is not, or is not trained that way, is probably going to panic if someone starts pulling out and there's a car coming. That the natural reaction is going to be stop. And I think as driving instructors, you have learned to rein in that natural reaction, and go for the brake pedal instead of yelling. But the reality is the consequences of a parent taking a young person out before they're ready could be disastrous, right? Could be catastrophic.
Well, we've had numerous people have accidents because of that.
Yeah.
Definitely. Luckily, some have been minor,
Mhm.
running into fences and things. But
Yep.
but yes, on the other end, it can be even psychologically damaging,
Yeah.
and affect the way that they end up driving into the future.
Yeah.
Because they're so concerned about this one experience that they've had,
Yeah.
they can hyper focus.
Yeah.
I have a client at the moment who went with a normal driving instructor, and parents to start with, and he's hyper focused on his hands, so much so that he doesn't even remember sometimes to look to give way.
So we don't really need to be looking at our hands when we're it's often at the steering wheel, isn't it? But even to the next level of being hyper focused on our hands is really not going to be helpful when we're supposed to be looking for traffic and
No.
navigating all of that stimulus that we see.
Yeah.
Somebody in those probably more early days, or if they're having particular challenges, what kinds of interventions do you end up having to do, Liz, as a driving instructor?
Interventions. So I don't think of them as interventions so much, because that, to me, that's a negative word. I just think of it as what steps do we have to take in order for them to progress to that next level. It may be, as I said, helping them getting out of the car. Okay. Yeah. Teaching them not to, okay, we do want a particular way to steer the wheel, but that's not the priority. Teaching them priorities. Priority is where a car's going and judgment, okay, on what's out there and what's happening. So not being nitpicky about particular things like our hands.
Yeah.
Okay, because we don't want to have the priority on different technique, on different things. So I will ignore certain things. So if someone pulls out, and they're only at the start and they miss a judgment, sometimes I don't even tell them.
Yep.
Okay, because that's not the priority. My priority is them getting around the corner in their lane.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mirror indicator brake. Well, that can be overstimulating. Like if we don't check the mirror in the early stages, that's okay. We can wield that in once steering's under control and we can get around the corner and stay on our side of the road. Totally agree.
Correct.
Totally agree.
Yeah. So it's not so much an intervention, but it is just a series of how do we break this down? Okay, whether it be off-road, then drawing, and then on-road, and then backwards again.
Some of the things that I want to highlight in this, as a driving instructor as well, as an occupational therapist, first thing, interventions is a very medical model word, and OTs tend to use that because we are trained in a medical model. So, Liz, I really love that you pointed that out, that it's got negative connotations to it as well. So I thank you for challenging our thinking around that word of interventions.
When I asked that question, I was more thinking along the lines of when the driving instructor would have to intervene on the steering wheel or the brake or the accelerator to avoid an adverse situation. But I really agreed. I really was happy to be pulled up on that terminology. So good on you, Liz. So hang on.
I love the courage that you've got, Liz, as well, to challenge us. That's great.
Yeah.
And it does take, I just want to, now that you're back, I just want to hone in on the working with the OTs and working with the parents a little bit more. What tips do you have for driving instructors, Liz, for working with OTs and working within the NDIS world and driver trained OTs? What tips do you have for driving instructors?
You have to, well, tips that I've always found is you have to want to learn. You have to want to progress. Like even now, I'm always learning. Okay, I even myself will go out and seek whatever the new research is. Okay, in order to help the clients that I have. Okay, so you always have to be willing to learn and develop what you do. Okay. And I find that no one way is the best. Okay. So what works for me may not work for the client. So it's just like, okay, well, if I can't make it work, I have to find something else that will. Okay. Whether that be another instructor. Okay. Because you have to pick what's best for them. Okay, so you can't be that competitive mode where you're trying to get all these lessons. Okay, you have to work best with the client. Okay, so, and you have to want to do what's right for them. Okay, and the OTs will see that. Okay, and you also have to create a conversation with them. Okay, and ask questions. Like if you don't know, maybe they have tips that can help. Okay, and you'll develop your own basket of knowledge and ways of doing things. Okay, that you may not have to go back to them as often. Okay, but then you do have to all work together, okay? Because a lot of the times working with the OT and saying this is happening in the lesson, they can then come in and support that client, okay, rather than just trying to do it yourself.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Now, you challenged our thinking earlier, and I love the way that your brain works. So I'm going to ask this final question. What tips do you have for OTs in this area? What can we learn from your experience on the road?
Well, you guys aren't in the car as much as we are. You guys, like we get to know the clients very, very much, very, very well, because we're with them so much. So also, you have to listen to us. Like I know I've emailed Jenny and other OTs great big long emails saying this is what they're struggling with. Okay, and so that way they can take that on board as well and not just think, oh, they're just a driving instructor. Okay, they may not know what we know. Okay, but like I will pick up on these small things because I've been with them for so long. And then that can give you guys an indication of what to look for when you come for the assessments.
Wisely is a lot of driving OTs are very much, and I might get some comments in regards to this, but I'm not afraid to say it. There's a lot of OTs that are just in assessment mode, and they're doing it to just get funding approved, or they're just doing it to get the license ticked off. But what you're saying is that we really need to be in a coaching, helping mode to try and get the very best outcomes for our clients and help them move through the process. Not just do an assessment and handball it on, and there you go, Liz. It's now your job. There you go. Fingers crossed. Good luck. See you when you come back for a reassessment. We don't want that approach, do we? We want to actually be having OTs and driving instructors that have got the best interest for the client in mind, and really problem solve together and have that good communication backwards and forwards, so you can work together from a medical model and a driving instructor model and make that come together for the best outcomes of the clients.
Yeah.
Love it. Love it. It's been a fascinating conversation, Liz. And like I said, it's been great to meet you online. I really thanked you for coming to us today in between lessons and in your car and in a car park and so forth. And we've had some internet issues along this conversation, but it's been even eye-opening for me, which has been very, very good. And it's been great to have a chat to you.
Thanks
Thank
so
you.
much for your insights, Liz. It's that I loved what you said about you as the instructor always being open-minded and willing to learn, and I think that's a real asset that you have, and what I'd encourage any driving instructor that's working in this space is to keep open-minded and keep being willing to learn, because at the end of the day, you're trying to, you're in this profession to help people, and if you don't have the skills to be helping, well, you need to either get the skills or refer them on, and I think that's a really admirable thing to acknowledge as well. So thank you. And we have our last little wrap-up question, but I think before we do that, we'll just hear from our sponsors.
Williams Occupational Therapy focus their attention on helping people with their mobility needs. From driving to wheelchairs, Williams OT provides help to get people mobile.
Well, we've just had a wonderful conversation with you today, Liz. It's been very even eye-opening for Brad and myself to hear things from your perspective, and we thank you again for your time and your knowledge and expertise from your office, your car. So we're going to ask you our final question that we ask all of our guests. And so we've learned over this podcast that cars are more than just getting from A to B. Cars and driving is so much more than that. Is there
offices? They're offices.
Yeah,
they're mobile offices, as we've seen today for Zoom meetings. That's great.
Is there a special memory that you have in your car, or one of your cars over the years, that has a special meaning to you?
Well, really, there's two that I can think of. One is I've got a Pacific client that I've had that I've taught right from the get-go, cerebral palsy, and she was they told her she wasn't going to be able to drive. But through working together and working with her mum, we got her through her license, with no modifications. So that was absolutely wonderful. But then on the other end, I've had definitely a Pacific client, a few clients who sadly were not able to make it to their license, and that is an aspect of what we do. But through that, they've come back to me, and all the parents have come back to me and have expressed how much they've gained still from the process. So whether that be understanding how the roads work in order to catch public transport better, or building the capacity to be able to do more around the home. So just because they don't necessarily get their license, this process can actually help them fulfill other goals as well.
That's wonderful. It is really wonderful. We see that all the time as well as driving ATs. You're spot on that. Yeah, not everyone is going to be successful, and it's quite difficult. We still don't have a crystal ball that will tell us, but with the right strategies, we're here to optimize people's chances, and even if they aren't successful, having those other improvements in their life can be really valuable. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. So Liz, if anyone is wanting to get in contact with you, what would your suggestions be?
So I, of course, only do specialised driving lessons. So all my work come through OT driving assessors. So the first step is actually to contact them. Okay, then they will put you in touch with the specialised driving instructor, right, or best suited, hopefully, towards you. So,
and you're working in the North Brisbane area, yes.
So
I go from
Adelaide, though, Liz. Anytime you want to move to Adelaide, shout out.
No.
Oh, come on, share her around. She's awesome. And it's very, very good, Liz. It's been absolutely wonderful chatting to you.
I didn't think he was going to try and poach you with this conversation.
Oh, come on. You know me better than that now, Liz. Jenny, you know me better than that. I'll try and get quality wherever I can. Hey, Liz, it's been absolutely fantastic. I really thank you again for the challenges of coming to us in a car park. Thanks to all the people in the background for agreeing to be on camera. I'm sure they did. But this is the challenges of doing a national podcast where you're in Queensland, I'm in South Australia, you're in a car. This is what it's all about, and it's being out and about in the community, and that's what we're trying to promote on this podcast and how we can actually do it. So I thank you. I thank you for being vulnerable. I thank you for being open, and I thank you for challenging us as well in regards to how we think. Because Jenny and I, like you,
and for challenging instructors as well. Keep open-minded and keep learning.
Driving Well Occupational Therapy loves working with people of all ages and with all kinds of medical conditions to safely give them the opportunity to explore their driving goals. As we wind up this episode, please remember that the advice provided in this podcast is general in nature. For your specific situation, you will need to get in contact with your local OT, vehicle modifier or mobility dealer and set yourself up with an assessment or trial. Trials really do put you in that driver's seat.
If you like what you've heard, make sure you like, rate and subscribe. It really does make a massive difference. If you or anyone you know would like to share a story about driving with a disability, or you would like to get in contact, find the show notes, or find the resources mentioned in this episode, you can find us on Facebook. Just search @DriveAble Podcast for more information.